This is a Nintendo Entertainment System Zapper, the most powerful handgun in the history of video games, and it could blow your head clean off. Do you feel lucky?
It really is something, isn't it? A few pieces of light and dark gray plastic, joined together by screws, with the added complement of a wire that connects it to the console. Though it also came in an orange variant, but that's beside the point. The NES Zapper was one of the many console accessories that gave Nintendo their identity. It was a piece of innovation, a tangible step towards the future that could be held, aimed, and shot.
Of course, the idea of light guns was established well before the Zapper was even a twinkle in old Gunpei Yakoi's eye. And yeah, the guy who made both the Game & Watch and Game Boy was also behind what is quite possibly the most recognizable video game peripheral to ever exist. The Magnavox Odyssey was the first home console to delve into light gun tech with a friggin' rifle no less, and there have been no shortage of updates since then, like Sega with the Light Phaser or Namco with the PlayStation Guncon. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the Zapper was not only highly successful, but to this day remains iconic.
Basically, I wanted to take a trip further back than I usually go and really pay the Zapper its due. After all, I own just about every officially supported light gun series title on the NES, save for Freedom Force, which is a real shame since I often hear it lauded as one of the best. And I believe it, especially since the guy on the front cover bears such a strong resemblance to Rutger Hauer.
And he's seen things you people wouldn't believe. Here's how it works. The Zapper relies on CRT technology. Using a combination of flashing images that span less than a second in time, the gun's internal sensor is able to detect feedback via white images on a black screen, which when successfully done, imitates the firing of a handgun. It's only through certain mods the Zapper is able to function with modern displays, and while you might think clone consoles are the go-to fix, there's no real guarantee of compatibility. Legitimate hardware is the only true answer. I'm talking about the holy pairing of an official NES console and a blocky TV that weighs a ton. And today, I'm really looking to keep things as authentic as possible. Well, now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's kick things off with Duck Hunt. Now, I'd just like to begin by saying that I've never met anyone, young or old, who hasn't at least heard of this game. It's the quintessential Zapper title. Just you and your hound out in the wetlands, blasting ducks out of the sky. Nary has there been a game more closely associated with a console than Duck Hunt and the NES. And for good reason. It was the second overall best-selling game on the system, right below Super Mario Bros. The two were bundled together in the US after all, so anything even resembling success was sure to follow. It's got 3 game types. Game A is one duck. Super simple standard stuff. The dog jumps into the grass, spooks a bird out, and all you've got to do is point and shoot, that's it. 3 bullets means 3 tries, and wasting all of them or taking too long results in this happening. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed what would become the most hated character in video games. There are 99 rounds in total, but I've never played anywhere near that amount. I find that things start to slow down come round 10, and anything past 20 is really pushing it with the slogginess. I know it's an old game from the 80s, but when all that happens with each passing round is the ducks getting quicker, there's only so much you can take. Then we have Game B, which is a bit more tolerable. You start off with 2 ducks right from the get-go, meaning if you experienced any pushback with just one, this is going to serve as a painful wake-up call. There's way less room for error since not only is it possible to miss 2 ducks at the same time, but you're still operating with just 3 bullets, meaning if you squander only 2 of them, you're gonna find yourself up Shit's Creek without a paddle. At least if you miss one, the dog doesn't laugh at you. Game C is clay shooting, probably the most self-explanatory mode here, but it can also be the hardest. For me anyway. The pigeon hitbox is already a lot smaller than the ducks, something that is made all the more challenging thanks to them shrinking over time. You have to be quick with this one. You might be tempted to let the discs fly out to see how far they can go before shooting them, but at that point, you might as well put the zapper down and let the round in by itself. But hey, look on the bright side. There's no dog to laugh at you this time. I don't think it's nice, you laughing. What comes after ducks and clay pigeons? Cowboys, of course. Wild Gunman might not have had the pull associated with Duck Hunt in the US, but in Japan, it was a completely different story. Leaning heavily into the Wild West aesthetic, it could actually be considered a remake of one of Gunpei Yokoi's previous works of the same name. The original Wild Gunman, which released in video arcades, was one of Nintendo's earliest electromechanical titles, acting as a marriage of full-motion video and player-influenced gameplay. Its home console version was one of the foremost titles released on the Japanese Famicom predating Duck Hunt, and acted as a major selling point for the console thanks to its, at the time, advanced mechanics.
But in the land of the rising sun, they didn't use one of these. No, this baby right here is the product of a redesign to be better fitted for the United States, which at the time was facing a crisis surrounding realistic toy guns. Japan, however, faced no such issue, and the minds at Nintendo R&D took full advantage of this freedom. As such, the Zapper, known over there as the beam gun, looked a little something like this. I know, right? This thing looks like an actual gun. It's got a hammer that you can cock, and everything about it just screams bad idea. I guarantee you, if I even so much as went out in public with this thing, I would probably get shot. But at the same time, it's awesome. It's ballsy. And that's all because they chose to model it after the greatest handgun ever made. The Colt Single Action Army.
Starting from the top, we have Game A, which is a one-on-one duel. As you could probably guess, the challenge here comes in the form of timing. See, firing before the time to draw is an instant foul, so the last thing you want to bring to this one is an itchy trigger finger. Along with that is the in-game timer, which functions in milliseconds. As soon as the guy calls out that it's time to go, you have got to be ready to pull the trigger, since even the slightest bit of hesitation can see you facing a swift loss. Like all Zapper games, it just comes down to the honor system. Yeah, I haven't quite touched on it yet, but a common thing with just about every game here is the fact that you can cheese the entire process by holding the gun close to the screen. After all, its only function is detecting light. How is it supposed to know whether or not you're cheating? But this is especially important with Wild Gunman, since its Old West premise is all about being quick on the draw. In Japan, Nintendo actually released an official holster to act in accordance with the beam gun, but any old knockoff will work just fine.
And while you can play with the gun always drawn, never having to worry yourself with being immersed, the intended way to experience Wild Gunman is as follows.
If dueling is your thing, Game B is more of the same, just upping the ante a bit with two bandits. It's like a two-sided Mexican standoff. Timing is still key, though some more strategy is required, as no two bandits will ever function under the same timer, meaning you have to work quickly to neutralize the more dangerous one first. However, a curveball can be thrown that sees only one of the two drawing, calling for you to not only assess the situation, but also pay close attention to who is considered fair. Game C is the gang shootout, and as such sees you standing outside of a saloon with bandits periodically popping into existence. There's no timer in this one, but your reactions still have to be quick or else it's game over. Fortunately, it operates around a fixed pattern, meaning that it will play the same way with the same spawns every time, and with enough patience, you can come to memorize everything.
Hell yeah, I feel like Marty in Back to the Future Part 2.
Another game that debuted on the Famicom is Hogan's Alley. In fact, this one and Wild Gunman share a lot of similarities with one another, and could even be considered sister games, despite releasing 6 months apart. Instead of blasting live cowboys, it's all about shooting cardboard cutouts. You're given a lineup with 3 indistinguishable targets which reveal themselves in the blink of an eye, some being civilians and some being crooks. The challenge is in making the right decisions. For every 3 innocents, there are 3 criminals, and whether it's game A or B, you're only given a few moments to discern between which is which. A lot of the time, I find myself accidentally shooting the cop because he looks so much like the dude in the suit. The game is very deliberate in making the designs closely resemble one another, so no matter how sure you are that you just deep-sixed a young punk with a machine gun, it might have been an old man instead. 10 mistakes and you're out, but seeing as actual Hogan's Alleys are used to train people in dealing with tactical situations, that'd be way too lenient in the real world. Though I guess the game wouldn't be as fun if your ass was finished after just 1 mistake. Then we have Game C, which is probably the most random thing ever in acting as a trick shooting mode. Various tin cans fly in from the right of the screen, and the goal is to land them within any of the 3-point zones. Oftentimes it'll come down to juggling a bunch of them at once, which is surprisingly rewarding when you successfully score all of them, and again, 10 total misses results in a game over.
But what about a game made by Nintendo of Japan that only ever saw a release in the United States and Europe?
That'd be Gumshoe, developed in 1986 by Mr. Balloon Fight himself, Yoshio Sakamoto. This one is pretty unique in the sense that it isn't at all like any other NES Zapper title. Instead of functioning as a type of virtual shooting gallery, it's actually a light gun platformer. The premise is that Detective Stevenson's daughter has been kidnapped by a mafia boss named King Dom, and in order to save her, he has to collect 5 Black Panther diamonds. Acting as an auto-scroller, it's up to the player to influence Stevenson by means of the Zapper. And yes, I said influence him. See, you have no direct control over the guy. He's constantly moving to the right of the screen regardless of what happens. But by shooting him, you cause him to jump, which is easy enough. However, this is all to be done whilst simultaneously avoiding hazards. The entire thing is trial and error. The only way to know what's coming next is by doing your damnedest to slowly progress through the levels before you inevitably bite it thanks to some unpredictable danger. It's oddly Jekyll and Hyde-ish, like not only is everything from bottles to birds and even rhinos out to get Stevenson, but the music itself is similar. I'm not trying to disrespect though, it was composed by one Chip Tanaka, who is of course known for his masterful work on Metroid, Kid Icarus, and the Pokemon series. But I ask, how many games have you played that have honest-to-God death blocks that act as an instant kill? This doesn't count. It was obviously lifted from here. It's just such a difficult experience, even without the pinpoint accuracy required. It's only because of a hidden game over method I was able to make any real progress at all, and even then, it was just insurance on account of everything being thrown at me. It's possible to score a few extra hit points that thankfully stack, but when all is said and done, it serves to delay the inevitable. The only thing certain with Gumshoe is that you are going to die. A lot. It's a tough game that I'm sure many have picked up, but few have mastered. But damn if it doesn't feel good too. On the other hand, we have Barker Bill's Trick Shooting, which is a collection of carnival-type gallery games with such targets as balloons and flying saucers, making it the most innocuous of them all. While it was developed in-house by Nintendo R&D 1, it isn't an original IP, instead being based on a 1950s animated television series, Barker Bill's Cartoon Show. Released in 1990, it was actually the last official Zapper game produced by Nintendo, and much like Gumshoe, it only ever released in the US and Europe. The Duck Hunt dog returns here, and while he still laughs at your failures, is nowhere near as much of a prick as he was before. If anything, he seems to have gone in an opposite direction entirely, becoming infinitely more, how do you say, suicidal. I'm not exactly sure what's up with the mutt, but at random points during the balloon game, he peeks out of cover and can actually be shot. Ah, bless his little heart. Pooch had no idea how many people were waiting for this moment. Of course, not every game that supports the Zapper was created with it in mind. Though few, there are traditional NES games that, instead of having the gun as a focal point, treat it as a secondary addition. Konami's Track and Field 2 is one of those titles, as one of its exhibition modes centers around using the gun. It is a sports game after all, so alongside the usual events like the hammer throw, swimming, and taekwondo, there is of course a gun firing level in which you shoot actual people? Wow. I honestly cannot say I expected that. What kind of Olympic committee gave this the green light? I mean, you think you'd be shooting targets or bottles or something, anything but actual people. And who are these guys anyway? Clad in trench coats and fedoras, anyone seeing this game without knowing what it is would assume it's some sort of noir mafia shooter, but no, this is an Olympic event, the sports contest to end all sports contests, and there's presumably an audience watching. I haven't even mentioned the fact that the game already has a dedicated clay pigeon mode, which doesn't support the Zapper sadly, so that just makes the entire premise all the more absurd. There is one thing, however, that cannot be denied, and that is that this here is easily the best Dirty Harry Zapper game we never got. Go ahead, make my day.
You know, they often say you should never handle a firearm while drinking alcohol, which is why it's a good thing I'm already done. Next up is Gotcha the Sport, a game that may surprise you, not because of its gameplay, but because of who it was made by. Son of a bitch.
Except it wasn't made by LJN, instead being developed by Atlas. Yeah, that Atlas. Really hope I can show this footage without getting copyrighted up the ass. See, it's a common misconception that any game marked by that colorful rainbow was made by a gaggle of laughin', jokin' numbnuts, when in actuality, LJN only ever operated as a mere publisher. And hold on to something because this may come as a shock to you, most of the so-called worst LJN games were actually developed by Rare. Yeah. As it turns out, those silly limey bastards wouldn't become a household name until Battletoads. Yet another instance of Brits having their asses saved by the frogs. This one's kind of weird. It's a capture the flag paintball game where the standard controller is used in tandem with the Zapper. Hitting the D-pad lets you move the screen back and forth, so already there's way more going on here than most Zapper games. Dudes running from off the screen, meaning you have to periodically stop and shoot them, but sometimes they spawn right out of nowhere, whether it's in trees or behind cover. The frequency of this naturally increases with each additional difficulty, but that's about it. 3 levels in total, and they loop infinitely, the second of which sees you in an urban environment, blasting punks who look like human versions of Bebop from Ninja Turtles. Am I still playing Gotcha the Sport, or is this the RoboCop Zapper game we never got? Then again, I'm not exactly sure how tough this really is, given that you can just keep scrolling and the guys despawn. However, the enemy team is also working to steal your own flag, oftentimes having to be intercepted on the return trip. I guess this is based on some movie from the 80s? I don't know. LJN, being a toy manufacturer, also produced a line of paintball guns to tie in with both products, so if there's anything to blame them for, it's their own shameless business practice. What can I say? Dudes liked having their hands in both cookie jars. Another game that uses both the controller and Zapper is Operation Wolf by Taito. In fact, the game can be played with the standard remote alone, though that of course means dragging a reticle across the screen. It's a conversion of an arcade title of the same name, notable for its no-nonsense ultra-violence. And whereas I'd love to talk about its attention to detail and disturbing game over screens, I found that it doesn't even work. The Zapper just wouldn't be recognized no matter how many times I pulled the trigger. It's either that or I'm the worst shot in history. Also, I think my copy might be haunted. What really sucks is that I can't remark about how badass it is that despite using a pistol, you single-handedly take down squads of infantry and helicopters. The original arcade game addressed this by making use of a machine gun, though this was of course impossible on the NES since it never had one of those. Right?
Allow me to take you back to Japan. Already they were doing some crazy shit with the beam gun, so when the time came for limits to be pushed even further, it'd be Bandai of all companies who'd throw their hat into the ring. The resulting product was this.
Tommy gun!
Not really though. It's definitely some kind of machine gun, but oh my god! How? How could they get away with this? Like, listen, this thing was considered too much. So much so that they made this thing. And even still, this thing was considered too much. That caused them to make this. But this thing? This looks like an actual machine gun. So let's try it out. Come on. It's a toy gun. It's not gonna do anything.
The Bandai Hypershot machine gun, as it's known, is easily the most hardcore light gun I've ever seen. A lot like the beam gun and Wild Gunman, it too received its own tie-in game, Space Shadow. This is a sci-fi themed corridor shooter that released exclusively on the Famicom, and the parallels between it and the Alien series are very much apparent. The machine gun itself is pretty much a zapper that's been modified to support rapid fire, a function that goes hand in hand with its built-in speakers as well as state-of-the-art body vibration system.
Yeah, this thing is a controller with vibrational support from 1989, at least 8 years before the Rumble Pack would release for the Nintendo 64, making it quite possibly the first ever controller to exist with haptic feedback. But being so old, it takes about 4 C batteries, so make sure you have plenty on hand.
As for the game, well, it's nice, a bit basic, but what are you gonna do? It's essentially a survival horror title wherein you shoot a plethora of different monster types within alternating ship corridors. However, you're working with a limited amount of ammo, so being accurate with your shots and conserving the most you can is highly important. Remember how the Zapper functioned by receiving light feedback from CRT screens? Well, this thing works exactly the same, but because it's automatic, the screen flashes at like 10 times the normal rate, and this released long before seizure warnings were common practice, so I'm willing to bet that while playing this game, there were a few kids that got super excited and started doing funny dances on the floor. In addition to its, at the time, face-meltingly unbelievable vibration support, the gun also doubles as a full-on controller of sorts, having notches for both the select and start buttons, as well as a movable nub that functions as the D-pad. The gun itself is understandably way more interesting than the game made for it, and it's a real shame that it never found an official release outside of Japan, especially since it is compatible with just about every Zapper game. It'd look real snazzy alongside a good old Super Scope, but hey, that thing is an entirely different beast. Bandai would also publish 1989's Shooting Range, though the actual development of the game was overseen by Tosei. Identifiable by the orange zapper on the cover, this is yet another carnival-themed shooter, but is all over the place with its settings. One level's in the Old West, another is outside of a ghost house, and the third and final takes place on the moon of all places. The first two are self-explanatory enough, if a little bit stereotypical. In the Old West, targets are presented as birds, cowboys, and Indians, though I don't really know what they're doing to warrant being killed. I mean, the cowboys at least pull guns on you, but these dudes are just on a leisurely stroll through the desert as one commonly finds themselves on. Of all the games in which you can manifest your destiny, the one I expected the least was Shooting Range. Meanwhile, the haunted house one is crawling with all sorts of usual horror monsters, like mummies, witches, and vampires, and there are also bonus stages in between that are all about shooting bottles and spinning Umbrella Corps logos. The moon, however, is about as far out as you can get, no pun intended, opting for these facehugger-like enemies, and whatever this is that reminds me of Mother Brain from Metroid.
So yeah, I like Zapper games. What can I say? There's nothing quite like seeing something on your TV screen and shooting it. I mean, my heart's beating, my hands are shaking, and I'm still shooting. Boom, headshot, boom, headshot, boom, headshot.
Well, we have been on quite a journey, huh? We started with ducks, went to cowboys, shot some inanimate stuff, partook in a few war crimes, wound up back with the cowboys, and finally reached unattainable heights with the loftiest of all.
Space!
It's only fitting that we cap things off with the final frontier, and there can be no greater cap-off than To the Earth, which I personally believe to be the craziest Zapper game ever made. Developed by the elusive Cirque Verte, seriously, this is their only title, this game released in 1989, and whereas most traditional Zapper experiences saw the player shooting ducks, cowboys, and cardboard cutouts, this one says to hell with it, and instead opts for a space shooter approach filled with the likes of asteroids and enemy ships. And it's probably the toughest of them all, since the targets in question move so damn fast. Mind you, this is another game that released exclusively in the US and Europe, making it strictly a Zapper game, so you are technically destroying all of these things with a pistol. Truly, the most metal handgun ever made.
And don't get me wrong, while I think the light guns they got in Japan are much more interesting simply because of their existence, there's no denying that this gun, this Zapper, whether gray or orange, is the most iconic video game light gun to ever exist, and almost single-handedly defined the innovatory nature of the 8-bit era. Sure, it's still a baby's toy, what with having to use your hands, but if this thing's a baby's toy, I only have one thing left to say. Goo goo gaga.